Good afternoon, everyone. I extend a very warm welcome to everyone who has joined us today for this third webinar on India's clean energy transition. In fact, clean energy transition has been a focus area for MongoDB India for quite some time now. This is the third episode in the series of webinar that we are hosting on the challenges and opportunities that the clean energy sector is facing right now in India. In today's episode, we want to discuss in detail actually the roadblocks that India's electric mobility plans face, because considering how vast and how huge our India's automobile industry is, it has become a very crucial sector for as far as government's plans to tap the clean energy sector is concerned. A sector which guzzles like a huge amount of fossil fuels and results in harmful emissions. The government has been focusing on the sector for quite some time now. Uh, at MongoDB India, we have done several stories on the subject. In fact, from the time that the subject was not even considered the mainstream subject, and following the government's push, the automobile industry too has stepped up and now is providing the required support as far as launch of new vehicles and planning for the development of a complete ecosystem is concerned. Thus, what we are trying to discuss today is the feasibility of electric vehicles, both for public as well as private sector. In fact, what we decided to have this episode after our audience repeatedly asked us questions in the last two episodes. To take this discussion forward today, we have a stellar cast of experts who will help us in understanding whether there is enough charge in the country right now to power India's plan for EVs. We have today with us Mr. Pulash Das. He's the head of e-mobility at Convergence Energy Services Limited, which is a subsidiary of Energy Efficiency Services Limited. He has worked in the power sector for over a decade and has contributed to India's electric mobility and energy efficiency programs. He has worked for the world's largest electric vehicle programs and procurement processes. As part of his current assignment, Mr. Das works in the deployment of electric two-wheelers through a government e-marketplace for EVs. Mr. Das has also played a key role in developing the EV charging infrastructure in the capital. We also have with us Mr. Avdesh Jha, who is the Executive Director of Fortum Charge and Drive India, a clean energy company working to transform mobility. Mr. Jha has over 3 decades of experience in the energy industry, spanning across government and private sectors. He, in fact, has first-hand experience in policy formulation, strategic planning, management, business development, project development, clearances, compliances. In fact, the whole ecosystem of electric vehicles. He's also worked closely with the solar projects. He has worked in the sustainability industry. We are very fortunate to have you with us, Mr. Avdesh Jha, today. We also have Ms. Charulata. She's the lead consultant for Electric Mobility and Clean Energy and Natural Resources Defense Council India program. She has over a decade's experience in climate change and the low carbon technology sector. At NRTC, she works with the national and state governments for the release of stronger electric vehicle policies. Her work also focuses on charging infrastructure and working with utilities to grow the electric mobility landscape. Her work also spans across sectors in climate change mitigation and adaptation projects, including low carbon transformation, electric mobility, energy and climate policy, and energy efficiency. I welcome all the three panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. Just before we start, just before I invite you to share your remarks, I'd just like to clarify that each panelist will get 5 to 7 minutes to share their introductory remarks, following which we will have a short discussion on the issues that you highlight during the discussion. And then we'll like to have a few questions which were documented by MongoDB India during our clean energy series. And as we listen to the panelists, I request the audience, those who are listening to us, to share your comments in the chat box and questions in the Q&A box. Just before I just invite the first panelist to start the discussion, I would say that we would love to hear the views about the sector in detail, but just a small request that if we can have the introductory remarks in 5 to 7 minutes, it will be easier for all of us to have a fruitful discussion. I will first invite Ms. Charulata to start the discussion and take the discussion forward. Welcome, Ms. Charulata. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayank, and a very warm, thank you to the MongoDB India team for having this very timely discussion. Hi everyone, I'm Charulata and I work as the lead for electric mobility and clean energy at Natural Resources Defense Council's India program. And why I say this discussion is very timely is because I think all the three panelists that are here today in this discussion, we all are based in Delhi NCR. And we all know that air pollution is currently peaking in Delhi. So, I would basically want to start my opening remarks with the scale of the problem and why do we need EVs? So we all know that globally GHG emissions from transport sector account for almost 15% of the total emissions. If we look at India, transport sector is the third highest contributor to to GHG emissions in our country, which contributes to around 10%. By 2030, these emissions are going to grow 3 times. By 2050, 7 times. So we know this is going to be a big problem in the future that needs to be tackled starting now. So it's not just the air quality improvement that we're looking at, because we know in India, 14 out of the top most, 15 polluted cities in the world are in our country. But it's not just the air quality problem, it's also the dependence on imported fuel, fossil fuel, and also the oil import bill and energy security that we need to look at. So if we look at, what is the political and regulatory support that has been available for EVs. So as we know, the national momentum on electric mobility and the government of India, the motivation is basically coming from the angle of energy security, air quality improvement, as well as industrial competitiveness. We all know the FAME scheme has been there and 10,000 crores have been, they were given for 3 years and now the scheme is extended. So the government support is there. There are a bunch of ministries and departments that are very closely associated with the electric mobility advancement in the country that have introduced complementary fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. There are a few sticks that are also being explored, but I would say we still have a lot of subsidies, but not a lot of mandates and sticks that can be introduced. Something like maybe a ZEV program at a state level. But something that needs to be highlighted is also the action that is happening at the state level. And we know that the states are playing a leading role. More than 15 states have come out with their electric vehicle policy. And then in addition to this, the industry that is growing around it, the emergence of indigenous battery manufacturing, indigenous electric vehicle suppliers, charging service providers that have grown in. So there is a lot of momentum. However, saying that there are a bunch of challenges as well to advancing electric mobility in our country. And I'll quickly, talk about a few challenges since we have limited time. The first one is obviously related to institutional and policy. So do we have a national target? Yes, we do. But is it clearly identified and do we need to fast track that target? How can we, have a more stronger target, a more central roadmap to basically avoid any uncoordinated or inconsistent policy signals that come. Also, the need for strengthening the policies at the state level and the coordination between state and central level. So again, coming back to my older point, we have a lot of carrots, but not enough sticks. So, and that is where policy can play a bigger role. Charging infrastructure is also one challenge, and the other two panelists are experts from charging. So I think that is one area that is also being tackled in a very, very good way in India now, and a lot of developments have happened in the recent past. Some of that that NRDC is also working on, and I'll highlight. And the third is vehicle supply. So do we have enough policies ensuring that we have electric vehicle supplies, something like ZEV policies, the limited number of models across vehicle categories. We know two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers also to some extent are sufficiently covered. But what about freight vehicles? What about trucks? Do we have enough models in India? The answer is no. And we know that the EV industry, the domestic manufacturing is still coming up. So but that is where the support is. But having looked at these challenges, I would again like to look at some of the brighter side and the developments that have actually happened in the past 1.5 years. And that is something that we really need to look at, because despite the COVID-19 pandemic that we all were grappling with since the past 2 years, if we see the progress in electric mobility sector, like I said, currently almost 15 states out of the 29 states that we have in India have released their policy. And there have been a lot of recent movers in the past 1.5 years. Gujarat was one where they were initially talking about 100,000 electric vehicles. And just a few weeks before the policy came out, they upped the target to 200,000 vehicles. So that was good. There was more budgetary allocation. Maharashtra, we've seen very recently, they have an updated electric vehicle policy and with a more stronger target. And they're talking about 10% EV sales by 2025. Again, putting a number to that and having a target is something that really matters. States like Odisha, West Bengal, Rajasthan, they also released their EV policy in 2021. 2020, again, when we had the first wave of COVID, Delhi, Telangana were two states and two big states that actually came out with very strong EV policies. Then again, recently we saw the Shunya e-mobility, last mile delivery program that was launched in September by Niti Aayog and Rocky Mountain Institute, which again aims to fully electrify urban freight deliveries in the next 2 years. The PLI scheme that came out and how the government is supporting it and the amount of funding that is going. The indigenous manufacturing support, the Make in India campaign, the Atmanirbhar campaign, just to give an example, the Ola electric two-wheeler factory that is coming up. So it's actually the biggest electric two-wheeler factory with almost 10 million in annual sales, which will be up and running in the next 6 to 8 months. And what does this essentially means? It means that India would be manufacturing one electric two-wheeler every 3 seconds. So, how is this helping us? It is bringing the scale to a country where the scale is definitely needed. And this will also help you in reducing the cost of the vehicle. Financing is something where, some few developments have happened, but I think a lot still needs to happen, where we need innovative financial models to actually fund these vehicles. So these are some of the, developments that have happened. Charging, again, like I said, it's a very important aspect to accelerating the deployment of electric vehicles. And for a country like India, which is actually prioritizing the electrification of its public fleets, it is all the more important to set up a very optimal, accessible, and affordable public charging infrastructure in our country. And there are a bunch of factors that actually need to be considered for this. What is the technology? So which connector are we using? What is the rating of that charger that is actually going, because this is all public money that's going into these public chargers. The electrical grid infrastructure, do we have the grid? Are the utilities on board? How can we connect so many vehicles to the grid, and how will that be supported? And eventually, the goal is to have all these vehicles powered by renewable energy. So how are we moving towards that goal is also something very important. Then the financial and economic factors around it. What is the grid connection cost, land cost of equipment of these chargers that are, the policies that are around it. Do you have favorable electric vehicle policies and incentives for setting up these chargers? What are the regulations and guidelines for different stakeholders? There are a lot of guidelines that are coming out for companies that are setting up charging stations, or how we call them, the charging service operators or providers. But what about utilities? What about building owners? What about vehicle manufacturers? So are we covering the whole set of stakeholders is something that we really need to look at. And also, do we have enough stringent fuel efficiency norms for ICE vehicles? Because that is the another side of coin that we can't ignore. Though we're talking about electric mobility, we will still have a very large share of ICE vehicles on the roads, and we need to make them more efficient as well. And then the last point is, on utilization of these public chargers. So we know the business case is weak, and the payback period is almost in the range of 5 to 7 years without any policy support. So we really need to look at, optimal siting here could be a key to increasing the utilization of some of these public chargers where the business case is really weak for the charging operators. So all in all, what I would like to say is that planning of these public charging infrastructure is essentially answering where and how many of these chargers should be placed in the planning area. And it is very important to focus on the where part, which is basically siting the charger to ensure that the charger is easily accessible, one, and also to improve the cost economics and the utilization of the charger. And NRDC and our partner, Administrative Staff College of India and Gujarat Energy Research and Management Institute, we've been working with them, and we did a report last year on some of the siting approaches that are available to site these chargers for Indian cities. And we are now currently piloting this in the city of Hyderabad, where we are supporting the government to basically select sites to set up these charging stations, and we'll come out with a manual, and that this all will be in public domain for anyone who wants the more information around it. So my whole idea is, we know there are challenges, but it's not that we haven't seen progress in the past 2 years, and especially now with India announcing 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel capacity at COP by 2030, and also India committing to saying that by 2040 we'll move to zero emission vehicles for some vehicle categories. I think this is a very apt time to ask this question, whether your next vehicle is going to be electric or not, and would you like to choose that or not. So with that, I think I'll close my opening remarks, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. In fact, this sets up the stage for a lot of my questions, which we have prepared for the discussion later on. Thank you so much, Mr. Avrita. I'll now go to Mr. Avdesh Jha, and I will I'll request him that if he can just take the discussion forward from the stage that Charu has given us.
Thank you, Mayank. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my views. I generally represent the four-wheeler segment. So I will be talking about generally the car, the passenger electric vehicle car, not for the two-wheelers and three-wheelers. I have a very simple take on this, that how the EV can be adopted in India. So obviously, I see there are a couple of false or also the wrong narrative that's also hampering the adoption of the EV, and there are a couple of, I would say, the policy intervention required. I'll talk about first the narrative, which is not correct in Indian context. See, when we talk about the four-wheeler segment, you might have heard most of the consultants or the webinar organizers or the experts from the government claiming that 80 to 90% of the charging will happen at home. That's a very umbrella statement which people are making regarding the four-wheeler segment. And at the same time, they also speak that lack of public charging or lack of charging infrastructure is creating an impediment for not having the adoption of electric vehicle. Now, these two are contradictory, because when you're talking about home charging, it will happen. So everybody has access to the electricity at home. And if the 90% charging will happen at home, then why the adoption would be affected because of the lack of charging infrastructure? What we have understood, from our operations for last 10 years, 11 years in the Nordic country, is that initial set of the people who adopt the electric vehicle in any country, they are generally relatively wealthier people. They can afford reasonably higher price for the electric vehicle. And it is expected that they will have access to the private garage as well. But as the vehicle becomes mainstream, then the demand for the publicly accessible charging becomes more and more. And this I'm giving an example from the Norway, where, as you know, that now 85% of the vehicles are on the electric. So it is no longer confined to the single family dwelling units with a private garage. It has now gone to the housing associations who do not have a dedicated parking. They have on the street parking and all, and they require a publicly accessible charging locations. Now, when you contrast this with in India, incidentally, as per the government data, around 70% of the car owners are parking their vehicles on the street. And incidentally, in India, those street parkings are unauthorized parking, because unlike Europe, where on the street you have an authorized parking for a particular time slot, including the overnight, in India, none of the street has an authorized parking except for in some markets where you have some designated parking which you have given to the parking attendant companies. So this narrative has to set right in India. And first of all, when we are talking about the EV adoptions, we should also not be very myopic. We should not talk about only 2 years and 3 years down the line when these vehicles will be adopted by the early adopters who will be relatively having a more power price or the purchase power. We should look for the longer durations. When you're talking about the electric vehicle becoming the mainstream, so means you're talking about by 2030 we'll be having 30% or 40% cars annual sales being on the electric, then you need to think of the longer term infrastructure. And that's where the emphasis, I think, in India should be on the public charging infrastructure and not necessarily on the home charging infrastructure. Because unless you make this narrative correct, your policy intervention, your market effort, the industry effort will remain, I would say, the lopsided or misguided. So that's number one. Number two, on the policy front, I personally believe that in last 3.5 years, India has done a lot on the policy front. It's a very, very, I would say the positive actions has been taken by India, right from the OEM side, or I would say the 5% GST to the income tax benefit on the purchase side. Similarly on the demand side, the government has done a lot. But where I find a challenge is that in the FAME 2, out of these 10,000 crore allocations, you are putting all the eggs almost in two-wheelers and three-wheelers, and very small amount for the four-wheeler passenger vehicle car. In fact, passenger vehicle car, you are not promoting it. You're only promoting the commercial taxi fleet on the FAME 2, and at the cost of the personal electric vehicles. Why? I mean, this is, and the charging infrastructure which you are setting up is for the four-wheeler passenger vehicles or four-wheeler cars itself. Now, this is I would say, I believe, if you take out any everyday's newspaper, it is the four-wheeler which makes the noise. It's not the two-wheelers or three-wheeler. I'm not saying that two-wheeler, three-wheeler is not an important segment. They are making around 85% of the annual sales. But which moves the cheese? Ultimately, it is the four-wheeler. In terms of GDP, they are contributing much more. Because if you are selling 10 scooter, probably one car is compensating that 10 scooter. And if you now then compare the 13% of the car and 80% of the two-wheelers, you will find that the car contributes much more in terms of GDP. So you cannot keep this segment away from the policy framework. I'm surprised why government is not talking that four-wheeler passenger vehicle has also to be brought in under the ambit of the FAME 2. So I personally believe that the government must bring that four-wheeler passenger vehicles also in the FAME 2. You can put a ceiling that fine, these number of cars I can promote. That's fine. You have a finite budget. That's okay. But from the signal point of view, you simply can't say that I don't care for the private passenger vehicles, because they contribute almost 90% of the personal mobility segment. So that's an important segment which has a strong voice that should not be left untouched. And unless you cover all the segments, you will not be able to address the pollution issues which Charu was indicating at. If you see from the pollution's point of view, whenever government introduce any odd and even scheme, those are implemented on the four-wheeler segment. So it means that you believe that the four-wheeler is important element for containing the pollutions. But in terms of the encouraging the vehicles, then you are leaving out the private passenger vehicles. This kind of, I would say, the gaps in the policy narratives is also required to be fixed. Then only we can send the right signal. So I will take a pause here, and I'll be happy to have a follow-up questions during your interactions. Mayank, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Shah. Thank you so much for taking this forward. Before I launch all the questions at all of you, I will ask Mr. Palash Ras to now have his take and tell us about how he has been tracking the sector, what he thinks about the electric mobility sector in India now.
Thank you, Mayank. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and addressing all the participants. So, I second everything that Charulata has, pointed out. She has literally pointed out all the pain points that the electric vehicle sector is facing right now, right? And I would like to differ what Mr. Jha is indicating, right? Because I'm coming from the government and we have a different take on the entire sector. So, briefly, we have been deploying electric four-wheelers for quite some time, and we have been given a mandate to deploy electric three-wheelers, and we have to replace the public transport through electric buses. So a lot of mandate has been given to us by the government, and we are following all those things, and large-scale procurements are being done. So my take I've been in this industry for the past 5-6 years. I've been closely watching this, and my take on the industry is that although there is a requirement for policy support, but electric vehicles should not be limited to especially for four-wheelers, right? So there are many different segments which are associated with electric vehicles, and we also must appreciate every segment has their own pace of taking off, right? So we have to see who are the first movers, which all segment will make the maximum impact, which all segments are cost sensitive, right? Adoption of electric vehicle is largely dependent on if they are affordable or not, right? And everything else comes after that. So affordability is a challenge that we are facing, and we think that it's the two-wheelers and the three-wheelers which will have the maximum impact initially, and that's why the policies and whatever the subsidies are being offered is being diverted to these segments, so that we can have an initial impact. By having more and more vehicles on road, there can be more exposure, people can relate to it, and through our models and different efforts, we were able to make certain impact by reducing the cost of the vehicle, at least, right? With the kind of subsidies that are available, both considering the state and the central subsidy, the two-wheeler is actually coming out to be cheaper than an equivalent IC vehicle. Given the fact that the total cost of ownership is also low, the operational cost is also low. So, the effort has been given, right? So we ourselves has come up with various different programs where we are making these vehicles not only cheaper, also easily accessible to the consumer. Like I said, we have developed a digital marketplace where anyone can go and they can book a vehicle and have it in 45 days. So these are the efforts that are being made by the government, not only in terms of creating the policies for various different aspects of the ecosystem. We are also trying to have vehicles deployed on road, right? Especially for the three-wheelers, we recently closed the largest tenders for three-wheelers of 100,000 three-wheelers that needs to be deployed, whereas we have a mandate for deploying 300,000 in the next 2 years. We are similarly running a grand challenge for replacing the electric buses, right? So around 4,500 buses will be replaced in the next 18 months. So, electric vehicle needs to be seen from, various different perspective, right? So although consumers, general consumers needs to be aware about, the good things about electric vehicles, but we also have to make efforts in terms of reducing the cost, make it easily available to everybody, right? Running campaigns where the benefits can be shared, okay? Because we have to understand that we are fighting with a technology which is in existence for close to a century, right? So it will take some time, right? Every segment has its own pace of taking off, and slowly and steadily, we will come to that there where there will be a lot of visibility, there will be a lot of awareness, conscious effort from the consumers to adopt to this technology. So this is my take, right? So I think that the the entire program, entire effort is going into the right direction, and things have started being seen on grounds right now. Programs are getting implemented. The government is not only the central government, state government is also taking conscious decision in coming up with a robust electric vehicle policy, which touches all the aspects of an electric vehicle ecosystem. So all these things are happening, and it will take some time to have more and more EVs on road. So that's from my end. So I'll be happy to take any questions that you place.
Thank you so much, Mr. Das, for these crucial points. In fact, the discussion so far and the remarks that have come up from all three of you tell the story that how complex the story is. And in fact, while we were researching, while we were trying to work around the stories, we found out how, despite a lot of glamour associated with EVs and all the noise being made, the targets actually, the targets that the government is talking about actually took some time. First, the government was looking at setting targets, then there was a thing about government not looking at targets, and then finally we had targets now. So just taking forward this discussion about that, should my next vehicle be electric? In fact, I will start from my personal anecdote. I wanted to buy a car last year. I went to the market, I checked the vehicles that were available, the infrastructure, the range of the vehicle and everything. And finally, when I decided about a vehicle, I decided against an EV because of the cost involved. So as far as Indian consumer is concerned, kya mileage hai, kitna deti hai, what's exactly the mileage and all that, these questions become of paramount importance. In such a scenario where the cost, affordability, and it is an important factor, how do we think, what do you think is going to be the market scenario as far as EVs versus ICE vehicles are concerned? Do you think the costs are going to come down soon? Because if I just put numbers in perspective, right now we have around 750,000 EVs registered as per the CEW dashboard, and we are looking at something around 15 to 16 million EVs by 2030, which is next 8-9 years, while we have millions of vehicles registered every year in the country. How do you see this playing out? The question is open to Ms. Charulata, anyone who wants to take it up to start the questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mayank. Well, if you ask me how the cost narrative is going to play out, I think it's like Palash was also mentioning, it's going to be different for different vehicle segments. For example, two-wheelers, it's not going to be a challenge, especially with a lot of indigenous manufacturing happening in the country. The prices will come down very soon. And I think price or cost of the vehicle is not going to be an issue for two-wheelers. For cars, definitely, I think it's going to be for some time. But if you ask me, I think more than cost, when I've been talking to people and the feedback that I've received is charging. That charging sometimes is a challenge, especially for four-wheelers. And sometimes I feel, it again depends on what kind of house you're living in, and a lot of, do you have public charging infrastructure around the area where you stay putting up in? So it really depends from case to case. And I was also planning to buy a car last year, and I was actually in the same dilemma, though I end up not buying a new car. So but I was in the same dilemma. And for me, the challenge was, I am living in a flat which is on the first floor. It's not an apartment, so we don't have public charging infrastructure near my house. It's a little far away, and the charger sometimes is working, sometimes is not working. So for me, the dilemma was, if I'm living on the first floor, how am I going to charge the car? Plus, I don't have a fixed parking spot. So I think that the challenges are very different, and we do have solutions to cater to these challenges, but it's going to take some time. Slowly we are trying to address some of the challenges. For example, apartment buildings are coming up with chargers, which are sometimes for private use, sometimes for public use. Sometimes you have outside the apartment building, people are setting up, RWAs are setting up chargers. You have curbside parking that is coming up. You have other public chargers within shopping malls, within other parking areas, public parking areas. So we are trying to address some of the challenges, not all, but I think it's going to take some time before we are able to address all the different kind of challenges that are available with respect to charging. Cost per se, if you ask me, it is going to come down with scale only. And scale will come when we have stronger policies, not just at the state level, but also at the center. And when we have a very strong target at the central level. So if that strong target is communicated and we are working towards it, is when the scale is going to be there and when the cost will come down. One good thing about this is that sorry?
Do we have a strong target? Do we have a clear target?
If you ask me, no. My personal thing is that we have very, very strong targets with respect to renewable energy, and they were announced recently at COP. If we can have something similar for electric vehicles at a national level, that is going to be super good. That is going to like bring all the transition. Another thing that is going to bring the transition to moving towards electric mobility, I personally feel, is vehicle programs. We can start by piloting it in one city or one state or one region, but we have to start somewhere so that we have more vehicles are produced, and that's how the cost is going to come down. Plus indigenous manufacturing, I think the government is doing more than enough. So they have a lot of programs and they are doing a lot around it. So that is something that is kind of covered, but I think ZEV-like programs are something that definitely will move the mark and will move this whole discussion around the cost of the vehicle, because that's where, when with scale, the cost is going to come down.
Thank you, Mr. Arvata. Mr. Das, I want to ask, as Charu highlighted, that it's a cycle. One step is going to impact the other step. So in that scenario, if you look at the policy, if you look at the numbers, and then we talk about the transition of the whole ecosystem for EVs, there is repeatedly a charge that the government is not coming up with a clear target or a clear policy. There are a lot of gaps that are there. What happens to those gaps? Because if those gaps are not addressed, ultimately the sector gets the boot.
Okay, government have been very clear on few of the things that they will be acting as a market maker. We are not here to do any business, right? Will help in the transition, right, with certain clear guidelines. The guidelines for charging infrastructure has been placed. A certain guidelines for deployment of the vehicle has been placed. So there has been certain guidelines which has been clearly laid out by the government. Then there are state governments who has clearly given given their mandate through the electric vehicle policies. I do understand there should be a national policy, but there isn't. But there are various reasons for not having that. I won't be able to quote them right now. But apart from the guidelines, although government should restrict themselves with just an initial push, but it's the market who needs to understand. They should come on board and they should see a viable business out of it so that the entire ecosystem can grow. Apart from that, on the other question, let me tell you what our experience on the pricing front was there. We have been into multiple procurement, and we do understand that electric vehicle market is a very price sensitive market if we talk about two-wheelers and three-wheelers, right? So we started with four-wheelers, and the first procurement saw around a 12 to 15% of dip in the initial procurement, right? Then we recently closed the three-wheeler procurement, where a three-wheeler that is being offered to me is way cheaper than an equivalent IC vehicle, whether it's a CNG or a diesel vehicle, right? So in a way, we are able to resolve the issue related to the high price of the vehicle. So anyone, a layman or someone who is driving an auto would like to switch to an electric auto. The first thing that they will see is the sticker price, right? And in a way, we were able to bring that cost by 24%. So right now in Delhi, an electric auto through CSL is not only equivalent, it's cheaper than an equivalent Bajaj CNG Auto. So we do understand it's the cost that's an issue. The second biggest challenge related to electric vehicle is non-availability of financing, right? So 99% of the commercial vehicle gets financed, and no one is coming forward to have finance this vehicle. So we are also working on that. We as a government department can catch hold of some international money which can be targeted to reduce the cost of the financing, and these things are required to make it affordable. We need some operational solution, right? We have been talking a lot about having guidelines, mandates, policies, but it's the operational solution that is required, which can be given to a normal consumer, which will help him decide whether the next purchase would be an IC vehicle or an electric vehicle.
Thank you so much. In fact, I remember during one of the conversations for our story, we spoke to people who were living in high rises, and as Ms. Sabi said, that person decided against buying an electric vehicle because the number of cars in the society and the unavailability of the of the charger. So this transition to the whole EV driven future requires a complete overhaul of the ecosystem that we have for automobile industry, whether ranging from where we have high power batteries, swappable battery system that we see in some of the countries abroad, or to enough charging stations. Is that anywhere near the horizon? Because all I hear everywhere, I hear about the plans, everything in the future. Do we see that happen? Mr. Jha, if you can talk a little about that, because I know you have working closely with the battery system, and then anybody else who wants to take that up.
So basically, you are saying that whether this transition is near the horizon. That's your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, if you are meaning that by transition, if you are meaning in terms of numbers, I believe it will take about 3 to 4 years time. And irrespective of whether it is a two-wheelers or three-wheeler, I mean, not three-wheelers, but two-wheelers and the four-wheeler, particularly in the personal mobility segment, it will take about 3 to 4 years time when you feel a substantial number of percentage of the annual sales happening through the battery electric vehicle. And clearly we are seeing it, that this is going to happen from the way you see the different OEMs now placing their different models coming up in the market, especially on the four-wheeler segment, despite no support from the government. Despite no support, I'm repeating it, that there is no support from the government as far as demand side is concerned for the personal mobility, barring few states who have given certain incentive for initial few numbers of the vehicles. There is otherwise no support on the demand side, and it is purely individuals' commitment towards the vehicle that they are buying it, and they are saying the economic sense there. Because when we talk about and again I'm being very brute because I'm an engineer turned manager, so basically I'm an engineer and I go into the logic. When we talk about the average that people say that the average drive is only 30 kilometers, so this doesn't make sense for the four-wheeler and TCO doesn't arrive. But then it's an average which you have aggregated over this 1.2 billion population. Average doesn't work here, gentlemen. The average will not work, because if I'm buying an electric and I drive from Delhi NCR to Gurgaon every day, I'm driving 100 kilometers a day. So it means in a month I am driving almost 2,000 kilometers. And for me, then the TCO becomes very viable, and that's where I am inclined to buy electric vehicle. So the person who will buy the electric vehicle initially will be those people who are driving more. And for them, it is absolutely making sense. And they will be getting the advantage of the personal income tax benefit as well. And that's how you are seeing that despite COVID, last year, the four-wheeler segment, whatever the amount and numbers they have clocked, this year in the 6 months itself, almost double that number has already been sold on the four-wheeler segment. And now you're seeing all the luxury segments also lining up that vehicles for selling into the car. So I personally believe that this transition is going to happen in 2 to 3 years time. And and again, I'm repeating that I'm talking of the four-wheeler segment, that despite no support from the government, except for putting up the charging infrastructure, which has not come up yet, despite DHI has coming out with the tenders and all, nothing has come concrete on the ground yet. Despite that, all the private operators like us, we have setting up the charging infrastructure. People are buying the vehicles. People are driving long range distance. From Delhi to Mumbai, even they are driving, despite having very sporadic number of charging there. So I think electric vehicle, everybody knows that on the total cost of ownership, even today, it makes sense for the intending buyers. So I am a firm believer that the transition has already started happening. Only thing is that the tipping point would probably come in 2-3 years time.
Just to ask one supplementary on it. Do you think that these high power batteries or swappable batteries are going to become a reality for India very soon?
See, as far as swappable battery is concerned, we believe that the swappable battery is a good case only for the three-wheeler segment, or at max maybe the two-wheeler delivery segment, but not in the personal mobility segment. Particularly on the four-wheeler personal electric vehicle or the car segment, it is absolutely not going to fly. On the three-wheelers, yes, because that's a kind of a, I would say, commodity, because it's a standardized product. There is no differentiation required. You can define the standards of the batteries. And the delivery segment also, you can probably do that one. But where there is a preferential treatment to be given to the individual customers, this battery swapping is not going to work. That's we strongly believe.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Jha. In fact, now I wanted to take the discussion towards the impact of EVs that we are talking about on climate change and clean energy in the cities. Especially, in the context that when we talk about how shift to the electric vehicles will actually help in decreasing the emissions and less reliance on fossil fuels. A lot of places, a lot of concern is there that whether these millions of EVs that we are talking about, will they run on power that is generated from fossil fuels or on renewable energy? Because in case they continue to run on power generated through fossil fuels, it means people living in Delhi and Mumbai may have a better air because of less carbon emissions, but somewhere a rural area and its environment will be paying the cost.
So I think, see, Mayank, I will like to take this question because I have been hearing these questions for last 4 years, and I think, see, this is just creating a monster out of nothing. See, so I'll start with one question. That whosoever asked these questions is that today everybody is making their home AC and the large format of the freeze and all, which are also energy guzzlers. Where from they are drawing powers? They are drawing powers from the existing grid itself. And they are fine because they are giving them the luxury. They are fine. And when it comes to the electrification of the transport, then they are starting raising those issues on that one. So that's number one. This is I would say a very Hippocratic version of this narrative. Number two, even today, we have done that calculations. Even today, if you take the examples, take the reference of the emissions from the CEA website for the existing grid mix of energy, and if you put that into the life cycle cost of the electric vehicle in India, I'm talking about, if it gets manufactured in India, that vehicle I'm talking about, it is still much better than the ICE vehicles, including I'm talking about the battery manufacturing and the recycling and this manufacturing of the vehicles and all. It is still about 20-25% cleaner in terms of total emissions over the life cost than the ICE vehicles. Third, now the interesting point is that already, as Charu had mentioned, that we are already progressing towards the greener grid. Now, if the people are saying that how long we should do it, my counter is that we should not stop adopting some new thing when already you have taken the step where grids are becoming more and more greener, and the emissions from the ICE, these vehicles, is going to be lesser and lesser and lesser, whereas the ICE vehicle would have a very incremental lesser emissions because of this stringent emission norms. So I think this entire narrative is basically not with a substantive merit. This is very, I would say, devoid of the facts, and one should do those analyses themselves. I mean, in the Indian grid, I'm talking about, we have done that analysis. So I think this doesn't have any merit there that we get. The fourth part, I mean, probably Charu can probably pitch in there. Even in, let's say, worst case, that it is being displaced from Delhi and Mumbai to the rural areas. Fair enough. Rural areas, because of the large open space, because of the large vegetative covers, it has a much better appetite to absorb those emissions, as work as a carbon sink, than these city skyscrapers. So one has to keep holistically in view instead of being intellectually driven that we are displacing from the city to the village side.
And Mayank, I would actually like to add to it some very good points made by Avdesh here. And just, the point that whether it's going to be RE powered energy or, coal fired power plants from where the electricity is coming. My point is, and I said this earlier also, the government of India is doing so much more on renewables, so much more. Just look at what PM Modi committed at COP. India was the showstopper at COP this year. I was attending COP in person, and I was so happy to be there, because being an Indian, if somebody just walks up to you and says, what is the outcome, if you look at the national announcements that were made, and India was definitely the company that had some of the very big announcements. We definitely need to see them in the NDC and the implementation that is going to follow. But just with the announcements that are made, and if we actually meet those targets, India will be generating almost close to 60% of their electricity from renewables by 2030. So people don't need to worry about whether these electric vehicles will be powered from coal or will they be powered from renewable energy, because like Avdesh said, the grid is already becoming green with every passing day. We have new solar, wind projects that are coming up. And again, this whole transition, another very good point that he raised, currently it's all urban. If we talk about electric mobility, it's only in tier 1 and tier 2 cities. What about rural areas? Why is nobody talking about those? Why can't we have three-wheelers to transport people from the villages to the main roads? Why can't we have mini buses for the rural people? Why can't we have electric tractors? It's only one state, Telangana, has a clause in their electric mobility policy that talks about electric tractors and providing subsidies to them. Why aren't other states doing it? Why aren't states in the north doing it that are basically agricultural states? Why is the focus just on urban transitioning when it comes to electric mobility? Rural is, and India is, if you look at the whole population, more than 50% of the population still lives in rural areas. So if we really need to transition to electric mobility, I think we need to now maintain that balance between urban and rural. So I know we're kind of digressing from the point of, RE versus coal-fired power, but again, a very good point that he made. We really need to now focus more on rural-based solutions and how we can, transition the mobility choices that we have in rural areas and how we can make them more cleaner. And I'm telling you, it's going to be more easier. We are working with some of the grassroots organizations, and we're trying to work on this very closely now. And hopefully, we personally feel that if these changes are women-led, this will not just improve their livelihood, but it will also give them, more confidence, more standing, and they will be using a cleaner solution, which will be more sustainable. So just looking at those options, I think it's very much important to again look at the urban rural divide that we have in India and focus on rural sector as well.
Thank you to both of you. I just simply tell you why I'm smiling, because this is one of the stories that we are pursuing, and we intend to come out with this in a couple of weeks. both from the gender perspective and from the rural area. So I understand where you're coming from. Thank you so much for these points. But okay, let's take this discussion forward. I want to understand about the retrofitting part of ICE. There's a lot of noise around. I think recently there was a policy also. There's a lot of noise around retrofitting of ICE vehicles with electric units, especially when we are looking at vehicles that are whose engines will no longer be allowed in urban areas. And so, do you think that is a solution, Mr. Das, or Mr.
Yeah.
Jha, anyone?
Yeah, definitely. We can make an impact when the ICE vehicles are off-road, right? It's not necessary that we should be adding more and more vehicles. It's also we have to focus on taking the existing vehicle off the roads, right? So policies like scrapping, policies like 15 years of usage. So all those things are being taken care for these things only. And retrofit exactly fits the concept, right? So we are pushing a lot to identify retrofit as in the FAME scheme, where people who can retrofit can also claim subsidies, right? So that's how they can bring down the cost. In fact, we are going ahead with doing some pilots in 3-wheelers and 2-wheelers retrofits as well. So we are calling people to showcase, do a proof of concept, and let's take out all the apprehensions which is related to retrofitting, right? Let's strengthen this product, right? Let's get it recognized, certified by the certifying agency, and let's give people an option, whether they would like to go for buying a vehicle altogether, or they can have a ready solution, like how the CNG kit has become popular. Why not an electric vehicle kit can be made popular, given that the cost will come down, the existing vehicles can be utilized. So a lot of effort is being given on this. It is in recognizing the product, and I'm sure in the policies also it will feature with subsidies being extended to this technology.
So Mayank, I have slightly different view here. I personally feel that electric vehicle should not be encouraged to go for the retrofitting, because when we say retrofitting, generally in India, you do not implement the regulation around the retrofitting so strictly. And this we have seen on the CNGs, this we have seen on the various modes. And electric vehicle with so much of battery energy, the chemical energy being on board, safety becomes very, very, very critical. And in retrofitting, unless you have a very stringent oversight on the retrofitting, this can go out of hand. And that's where, and second part is that ultimately what you are doing in the retrofitting, you are removing the entire ICE systems, and then you have to replace the entire thing with a battery and the motor. What else? So cost, there would be maybe 15-20% cost differential, but you are running a very huge risk of the safety side unless these retrofittings are genuinely oversight mechanism is well placed. So that's where I believe retrofitting should be discouraged, though I know that the government has issued a norms also, a guidelines also, that they would allow it. But I personally believe that this is an area which should be treated very cautiously.
I think we'll see more of discussions around it in the near future to come, because honestly, whether it is COP or whether it is the guidelines around retrofitting or all the other plans that are spoken from the stage, I generally have my doubts, because even though I'm an optimist, my experience so far says that big announcements and their implementation, there's a huge difference. There's a sea difference between the big announcements and the implementation part. So okay, I will encourage our audience to put their questions in the Q&A box. I have another question before I take up questions from the audience. This is one area that I really want to understand from all of you, that when we talk about clean energy, there's also a conversation around a good clean supply chain for batteries. So a lot of environmentalists, experts working with the think tanks, they talk about that how we need to ensure a clean supply chain for the minerals that are required for the batteries. And for those batteries, India is not the producer of those minerals. So when we talk about those minerals for the batteries, they are coming from other countries. So does that mean that we, shift the arena for conflicts when it comes to mining for those minerals from India to other countries for clean energy revolution in India? How do we address that clean energy, a clean supply chain for the electric mobility sector?
So I can go first. I'm not an expert on batteries, Mayank, but my 2 cents here would be, recycle and reuse is really the solution. If you're having lithium batteries, please come up with the regulations on how you will reuse and recycle those batteries, plus the end of life. I mean, I was traveling recently and I came across an expert from Scotland who basically picked up batteries from a dump yard, and he's making, batteries out of those batteries that people have dumped outside. So even in a battery that we think that is dead, there is a lot that can be salvaged. So recycling it and reusing it is something that we really need to do in India. And that's where, I hear this question again a lot, that we talk about energy security, but if you don't import fossil fuels, you end up importing lithium or other minerals. And do you want to, do you want to like get into the same loop? And the answer is no, we don't want to. And if you don't want to, you need to recycle the minerals that you have, because again, you have very limited minerals on this planet that we're living on. So we need to use them judiciously. And again, the batteries can't go to the dump directly. Everything that can be salvaged needs to be salvaged. And that's how the system is going to become more effective. The emissions are going to come down. The cost is also going to reduce by that when you have recycling of materials happening. So I think that's what my input is here.
On batteries, my vehicles put together is close to 50 megawatt hour of batteries that are running on road right now, and in close to 3 or 4 years, they will be out of the usage in an electric vehicle. So I need to have a solution for my own batteries that I'm owning right now. Right, I need a solution for that. So this is something called circular economy that we are working on, right? So utilizing the batteries which would not be usable in an electric vehicle, we also have a vertical where we are working on grid stabilization using battery storage, right? So we do understand that going forward, disposing battery will be an issue. Ministry of Environment is working on that, right? They are developing certain guidelines on how to dispose this and how the lithium ions can be extracted out of it and can be repurposed. So we are trying to build up a business model out of it. Everything drill down to a viable business model, right? So if there is these batteries can be reused, repurposed, recycled, right, and can be put for a different purpose, can be used for a different purpose. So this is something that needs to be to be brought onto the table. People should come up with business models, come up with a business solution. Business solution is what is required more of rather than an environmental solution of these batteries, right? So this is something that we are working on it, and probably going forward there will be some solution coming few years.
Yeah, and Mayank, I would like to add here what Polas had said. While it is important that we should have a framework in place, the policy framework in place, that how can we retrieve the critical rare earth materials from these lithium-ion batteries or the end of the life battery. But we should also be, clear to the fact that these, especially I'm talking about the e-mobility batteries, the lithium-ion batteries, they have a long life. So let's say if we talk about any four-wheeler, generally you'll find that every four-wheeler manufacturer is giving you around 8 years warranty or 150,000 kilometers of warranty of the vehicles. So on a larger personal mobility segment, the vehicle would be there in the car for 8 to 10 years. And only after that, most of those vehicles would be eligible to, not to be used in the electric mobility. But then still, a lot of juice is left, and where what Polas is saying, that this can be used for a stationary storage. And there it will again go for a 5-7 years before it becomes a candidate case for a real recycling or a real disposal. So I think, you have a window of around 10 to 15 years time when chunk of those batteries would be coming to you becoming eligible for the recycling and the disposal. So you can use this 10-15 years window to perfect your framework, or you can develop those recycling systems. Because even today, I give you an example of our company. We have developed a manufacturing, we are setting up a manufacturing plant, and because we can retrieve about 90% of the materials from the lithium-ion battery in Finland, we have a manufacturing plant there, and we're setting up another plant. But then at this stage in India, we don't see the scale, we don't see the volume for setting up a manufacturing plant. Now, if you don't have a volume, and those volumes would come from the used vehicles, those volumes would come 10-15 years down the line, then who would put up investment into these recycling facilities? Now, this would come when you have this under PLI scheme, when you have the battery manufacturing plant coming up gigawatt scale. Probably that would give you the real, I would say, enablers will be the real enablers for creating that ecosystems, because those wastes, even that would be quite a scale, and that will help to set up those recycling plants, and subsequently that would be scaled up. So the bottom line is, the essence of my argument is that, yes, we should be aware of that this requires a recycling, a very responsible recycling, but the time is not now. It requires 10-15 years time. This window we should use to develop our ecosystem and create a framework. We should not unnecessarily rush for that, oh, if this is not there, that's why we should not go for the electric vehicle. That kind of narratives we should avoid.
Thank you all three of you. I'll now go to the audience questions. We have quite a number of them. And before I do that, I'll just mention once again that this topic today that we have taken, which should have be elected, was also a result of the questions from the audience. So I will encourage all the people listening to us that please put your question in the Q&A box, and you never know that for next webinar in December. Anyways, in fact, the first question is from Mr. Rajesh, who is asking that batteries of electric vehicles contain chemicals like lithium, lead, acid, polymers, like sodium. When we dispose of non-functional batteries, are they not going to create chaos like what plastics are doing to this world now? I think several people have answered that, but will Charu like to take it and give a finishing touch to your answer before that? What you just said.
Sorry, are you asking me to answer? There's some disturbance in the audio.
Is it better now?
It's slightly better now. Yes. So I think my answer would be, you're absolutely right. And, just taking the cue from what Avdesh said, though electric vehicles have a lot less number of batteries now, and this will become an issue for the electric mobility sector, probably 10-15 years down the line. But in general, other than that, we do have a lot of batteries in India. So if we develop those standards now on reusing the batteries, recycling the batteries, and the end of life for these batteries, if we have the standards now, we can actually avoid the same situation that has happened with plastics. And I remember for plastics in 2019, the government of India came out with the waste management rules, wherein the companies that are generating the plastics need to take back the same amount of plastic and recycle it. We can actually start, making those regulations now, so that the other sectors can start adopting it. And eventually, when electric mobility is at scale, definitely the mobility sector can also adopt it and ensure that we do not have a similar situation.
Thank you so much. I'll just take another question from, okay, this one is anonymous. The audience member has chosen not to identify. The question is that, consider the question from a layman perspective. Let us consider a consumer bought an EV two-wheeler vehicle. As that person will be using this own charger in his house or office, in future, when the public charging stations are available, he will be in a position to use different EV chargers, maybe different specifications. So will it affect the vehicle? One. Two, the question comes to mind, as we will be charging our mobile phones, when we charge our mobile phones with specific chargers only, and in case when we use it with other chargers, it impacts the phone. What happens to EV vehicles in such a scenario, or will there be such a scenario?
Yeah, so I think I would Polas can supplement because he is dealing with the vehicle side. But then, based on my uh, reading, I would say, because I don't have a first-hand experience that how much it is impacting, but based on the secondary research which I have done, at least on the car segment, what I have observed that when you do a charging from your home charging, that is on the AC side, that is basically the AC mode of charging. And if you do the charging on the public charging, primarily on the DC side, because it's a DC side which the manufacturer says that the vehicle's battery life or battery health would be impacted. When this research was done in one of the states in USA, and two vehicles, of the same manufacturer, same make, everything. One vehicle was driven, both the vehicles were driven for 50,000 miles, and one vehicle was every time they were charged on the AC charging, and the second vehicle was every time charged for DC charging of the 50 kilowatt DC charging. And at the end of the 50,000 miles, it was seen that the relative life of the battery of this of the vehicle which was continuously charged on the DC has a 3% more deterioration than the vehicle which got continuously charged with the AC. So that's very insignificant over the life of this vehicle, because 50,000 miles means almost 80,000 kilometers. So I think the nowadays the battery technology is getting matured and it is being perfected, where I believe that whether you charge at the AC or a different chargers or a DC, it is not going to make much difference in times to come. Yes, currently the technology doesn't permit, so the manufacturers is recommending that you should have periodical AC charging, but in times to come, it is not going to matter much that whether you charge at home or whether you charge at different public charging stations.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
We have one question from Madhulika. She's asking that with just 4 months to go, FAME 2 scheme has just achieved 10% target as per the ministry itself, and with a clear subsidy scheme, uptake remains a concern. Despite the EV sector being price sensitive, a subsidy mechanism isn't providing much of help. Any reflection on that?
So should I?
Please, Mr.
Yes,
Das.
okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'll talk about two-wheelers and three-wheelers first. People, most of the OEMs are seeing a growth of 180 to 300% past 3 to 4 months, right? So most of the OEMs who are popular right now are startups, right? Or the OEMs are right just now venturing into electric vehicles, and they are overwhelmed with with the orders. So in comparison to whatever has been happening 6 months ago, right? The offtake has been quite good, if I would say. So I was analyzing the three-wheeler of offtake. The largest OEM is doing 180% month on month, right? And the market share also increased from 2% to 4.5%. So the offtake is happening, but there is also a constraint in terms of supplying of vehicles as well, because of the global issue of chip supply. That's what the high-end two-wheeler manufacturers are saying. And we also have to understand that most of the popular vehicles are from startups. They are not the conventional vehicle manufacturers. They have their limited capacity. They have plans to ramp up quite a lot, but it will take some time to have a larger deployment, and which will have a comparative outlay of subsidies from the FAME as well, right? So the mandate is to cover all the subsidies till 2024, and the kind of deployment that is happening, we are quite sure that all the subsidies that are being given by the central government will be utilized.
Yeah. So Mayank, I appreciate Pala's views here, and then obviously he represents government. Especially he comes from the government background, so he will have a very good defense of the government. But I personally feel that the poor offtake of these FAME subsidy during these 3 years is non-application of the mind when they were framing the category of these that who would be the eligible for taking these subsidies. So if you analyze this, maximum subsidy was towards two-wheelers, and there also they had, see, again I'm telling you that that's where we need to understand, and we need to go at the granular level. The government has a very lofty and I would say very right ambition that we will be promoting the advanced chemistry based vehicles. But at the same time, so obviously you had removed certain vehicles from the ambit of the FAME 2. And most of your two-wheelers OEMs were manufacturing precisely those kind of vehicles which were driven by the lead acid batteries, and within that less than the threshold the driving range and all. So they found that we can't don't get qualified in this FAME 2, and that's where they found catching up, and that's where this not it has not picked up. Now it is expected that in next 2 years, because it has been extended by 2 years, and interestingly, they have also increased the subsidy on the two-wheelers by 50%. Earlier it was 10,000, now it has been 15,000. So obviously, what you are trying to do is sell lesser number of two-wheelers, but I can still consume more and more subsidies. So this is also the analysis of these. See, one thing one should be aware: in the bus that was purely under the government segment, it has not picked up that much. Why it has not picked up that much? That is where the government should look into. And there, I believe, is that since almost all the STCs in the countries are financially bankrupt, they are loss making entities. So they require whatever money you will be giving them, they require 100% subsidy, then only they can buy the buses, otherwise they can't even buy the buses. So there are structural issues in this one. And now the larger issue which I feel which is going to the government is going to face from the OEMs of the two-wheelers is that, I give an example in the US. In the US, when the subsidy is given even to the end customer, they are making a cap on the individual manufacturers, because they believe that it should not happen that one particular brand of the car should grab all the subsidies. So in two-wheelers, now your target is 1 million. Now, if one particular manufacturer sells 2 million two-wheelers in one particular year, it means that particular manufacturer's car two-wheelers is getting all the subsidies in 1 year itself, and then rest of the manufacturers will be without subsidies, and then they will start complaining against the government. So I think this is the right time when the government should also start thinking on this. Should we have a cap on the individual OEMs, at the same time asking the OEMs to manufacture a certain percentage of the vehicles? Then only this FAME subsidy would be, I would say, equitably utilized.
Thank you so much. In fact, that takes me to the last two questions, and one of them directly deals with the public transport. Mr. Swaminathan is actually thanking all the panelists for great presentation and great remarks. And Mr. Swaminathan is saying that should we not look at a shift from personal vehicles to public transport? Will it not be better to develop electric buses and provide more cost-effective choice for this shift?
See, I mean, while I'm all for it, but we should also be aware of the consumer behavior. Now, we have the metro, the best metro in Delhi. Have you, I mean, at least my study says that which segment of the consumer has moved to the metro? Probably not the car segment. It is a segment who were driving on the buses or the three-wheelers. They have moved to the metro segment. What I'm indicating is that when you're talking about the public transport by just providing a bus will not help you. what it requires a associated infrastructure as well. Do we have enough road width? Do we have enough comfort on the road transport, which will let you, and do we have enough buses on the road, which will not let you sweat in the while you are standing in the inside the buses? These are very important and very the consumer centric aspects. It is very easy for the policymaker to say that, oh, encourage the buses. Yes, fantastic. But then do you believe that if you have to go for a board meeting, will you go into the buses the way the bus are operating in India today? Probably no. Then which segment of the consumer you are trying to move? Are you trying to move the three-wheeler segment? Are you trying to move the car segment? These are the fundamental questions which the policymaker must brainstorm, and without any biases, then only we will probably be able to arrive at a real public sector, public transport. Otherwise, it will all be talking and nothing will materialize on the ground.
Mr. Das, you
Okay,
yeah.
so yeah, so although it will be a good thing to shift people from two-wheelers, three-wheelers, four-wheelers to buses, but we also need to understand that the buses that are being are being run by STUs are all packed, right? So if I am able to, with the existing ridership, if I am able to change the entire bus infrastructure, that's what we exactly are doing, with 4,500 buses that have been mandated for these 9 cities, which will be acting as a lighthouse cities to all the others to follow. So this is what we are exactly doing, right? So that's the although we do understand that most of the STUs are financially red, right? So but it also has to be understand that the public transport needs to be transformed, right? So there are buses which are applying from 15 to 20 years. Those are the first one to adopt, should be adopted. And if someone is replacing the fleet of the existing buses, then the first thing that they should look out is for electric buses. And here where the government comes into, and they have developed this the grand challenge through an OPEX model, where the subsidy that is being passed on to the STU will not be done on an CapEx mode. It would be on an OPEX mode, right? So the bus has to run to 10 to 12 years so that the subsidies can be claimed and then can be utilized. Okay, so first let's develop the infrastructure, which is the purpose, where the charging infrastructure, the development of the depots, the conversion of the buses will happen. And then probably we can think about transitioning of the four-wheelers and the metro people to come on board and utilize the buses, right? So the first aim is to whatever buses which are old enough, which needs a replacement, the first option that they should get is doing an electric buses, and enough support, enough subsidies should be given into, there is almost 200,000 buses plying on Indian roads, right? And we are talking about replacing around 4,500 in the initial first go. So this will help the STOs and the other stakeholders to understand how an electric bus works, what exactly this technology is, how this can be managed for the next 10 to 12 years. So there will be a drastic transition from an IC bus to an electric bus. So the people's mindset, the drivers, the operators' mindset needs to be changed. So this transition needs to happen, and that's what exactly is being done, right? So although transition from two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and four-wheelers and metro people into the buses would be a good thing to do, but the first thing is to replace the bus itself.
Thank you, Mr. Das. Thank you, Mr. Jha. This brings me to the last question. We are almost running out of time. You want to add something, Ms. Charulata?
Yes, I wanted to add to the last question. That was very interesting. And I just wanted to say that if you really want to transform the public transportation system, and specifically the buses, in addition to the buses, we also need to develop the first and last mile connectivity, and that also needs to be electric. So if the transition has to be there, how are people reaching those electric buses? Do you have electric rickshaws or mini buses or feeder buses that we have for metros? Are they available for people to reach? That's one thing. The second thing is that currently the government is providing a subsidy on the bus, but the challenge is when you have to charge the bus. So the chargers are also being provided with the buses, and under the FAME thing you have that you'll get one charger and one fast charger for every 10 buses and one slow charger with each bus. But the question here is, what about the grid connection cost? Because these are all big, heavy chargers that are 200, 300 kilowatt chargers. If 20 such chargers are being put up in one bus depot, then what is the grid connection cost? And that is substantially high, and it runs into crores. Somebody pointed out here, I think Avdesh said that all these state transport commissions are actually cash strapped. So how can they fund that, grid connection? And that is something that Polash, maybe, that is something that the government can look at, and that any support on that could be helpful. And my last point was that we were talking about, consumer behavior and changing that. And with COVID, definitely the consumer behavior has changed, and people initially were moving, more towards personal vehicles and less towards public transportation. But in addition to developing public transportation, I would like to say we also need to look at other modes like non-motorized transport, cycling, and how can we advance those are like, they completely eliminate the question of emissions, and we really need to think about those as well when you're talking about mobility as a whole. So
we have electric cycles also now, but anyways, this
we
thank you for these crucial points. In fact, the last question from Mr. Siddharth talks about the impact of COVID. He's asking, when there is demand and supply mismatch in economy battered by COVID-19, a country where per capita income on farming is 1.15 lakh per annum, which accounts for 55% of working population, is the target set by Government of India and some states for EV sales too lopsided?
In my view, no, it is not lopsided, because development has to happen in every sector. And when you're talking about transport sector, then if you're talking about sustainable policies that need to come, and the green recovery from COVID, then for the transport section, yes, electric mobility makes sense. And here, definitely, I would like to reiterate my point. Currently, it's all urban. We need to look at rural. So that balance needs to be bought in, so that the rural people can also experience these vehicles. They should be able to afford it. So we need to have more better financing mechanisms around it. But I mean, we know we are recovering from COVID. Every country is, but there will be, recovery mechanisms that will be there in every sector. For transport, my view is that this definitely makes sense.
Thank you. Ms. Das?
Yeah, so we have to take these vehicles to rural India, right? So that will happen by two ways. One, reduce the cost, make it affordable. Second, give easy financing. It's no it's a simple thing that is associated. Apart from that, all the ancillary services like service stations, showrooms, roadside mechanics associated with an electric vehicles, all needs to be developed, right? So a rural India should get familiar with an electric vehicle first, right? So it's right now it's a misconception that it's an electric vehicle is only for urban population. So we have to get the vehicle out of this mind frame, and we have to bring this to rural India. That will be only possible by bringing down the cost of the vehicle and giving financing to at least to the commercial vehicle like three-wheelers, tractors, and small commercial vehicles.
Mr. Jha, you want to add something?
No, that's not. I mean, I think this is good to go.
Thank you so much. We are running out of time. We have no more time. We'll have to finish the closing session today, and I will encourage all the audience members to follow us or send us questions or ideas for more webinars on the subject. We have a whole series on this topic. We'll be looking at the next 1 year. We'll be writing completely and focusing on this big time. It has been a very exciting discussion, and trust me, I want to personally thank all the three panelists, because your discussion and your remarks have actually given me a lot of story ideas for the series. So thank you so much. And I hope, Mr. Das, you have already a lot of food for thought from the government side. You were representing government, and trust me, everyone had one or other suggestion for the government. In fact, so we'll be looking forward to being in touch with you. And thank you so much for this discussion. Thank you, all three of you, for coming and giving your time. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.